Hi, I'm Femi OK, and you're in the stream. Today, in the absence of a teacher, can school children learn by themselves? We'll speak with one man who says yes, he's pretty confident. Digital producer Malika, we posed a similar question to our online community.
Right. They're just as confident, and there's already a healthy debate going on online. We want you to weigh in. Do you believe children have the ability to teach themselves? You can use our app to share your thoughts or tweet us during the live show with hashtag AJStream.
Schools, as we know them, now are obsolete. So says education pioneer Sugata Mitra, who believes the only thing children need in order to learn is a computer connected to the internet. He maintains that a self-organised learning environment, or SOLE, where children teach themselves and each other, is what's next for our classrooms. Mitra calls this the school in the cloud. Now, in this environment, the teacher, whether physically in the class or a Skype granny who lives halfway across the world, becomes more of a mediator in a session. They simply pose a big question to the kids and then let them investigate the answer by themselves. Have a look at this.
You make your own groups, you can change your groups, you can walk around, you can look at other people's work. It's anything but a classroom, right?
As soon as I started doing it and seeing the buzz and the enjoyment of the kids, it made me look at my lessons differently and the role of a teacher differently, less talking at the front and more handing it over to the children.
It's like a bread design, so can you come around the middle, please?
The learning will be a lot deeper because they've gone and found that information out. I haven't just told them it. You're building skills for life there.
Now, could this revolutionary experiment be the future of learning? Joining us to discuss this via Skype from Newcastle in the UK, Dr. Sugata Mitra himself. Great to have you here in the stream, Dr. Sugata. We also have...
Thank you.
You're very welcome. We also have a few people ready to ask him some questions. From Los Angeles, Amy Harrington is a self-directed learning advocate. In San Luis Obispo, hello, California, we have Mike Godsey, a high school English teacher.
Hi.
Hi. And in Geneva, Switzerland, Sunita Semi is a Skype granny.
Hi.
Hello, everybody. Great to have you all here in the stream. Let's start with you, Sugata. This is quite a revolutionary idea. How on earth did it come to you? Because it's really shaken up some people's ideas of, well, do we even need a teacher? What is a school? What is a school for? But it all started in what way? Tell us the story.
Well, I kind of bumped into it 16 years ago through an experiment which was not really designed to do any of this. It was an experiment to see if children could learn how to use a computer by themselves without having to be taught how to use mouse and how to click and that sort of thing. In the process, what I found was that not only can they do that, but having learned how to use the computer, they also start to find out things for themselves.
So set the scene then. You decide, well, how do children learn using a computer? Can they learn using a computer? So you put a computer where?
Well, in those days, a computer was pretty expensive, you know, 3 or 4 months' salary. So nobody ever dreamt of giving a computer to a child. I mean, computers were kept in the study of the mother or the father in the house, and that's it. So the only way you could give children computers, I figured, was to buy one and stick it in the open somewhere. But you can't just keep it on a table. So I copied what the banks do, which is I made myself a do-it-yourself ATM.
Right.
And stuck a computer into a wall.
Yeah.
Which is why the media called it the hole in the wall. And then just left it there without any instruction to see what children would do with it. And, well, the rest is history, really.
They did what? They played with it? Well, they worked out how to negotiate the computer using English?
Yeah, well, first of all, they figured out how to use the computer. Then they figured out how to go from one website to another, and they described it in their own terms. They said there's an arrow, and you can move that arrow with your finger. They had a touchpad.
Yeah.
And until the arrow turns into a hand, And when it turns into a hand, then you have to click, which they had discovered by themselves. And if you click, then Shiva's drum starts to play. And I said, what? What does that mean? And then I realized that the hourglass is not a common symbol in India.
Right.
These children hadn't seen an hourglass. But the hourglass actually looks like Shiva's drum.
Ah.
Okay, you play it like that.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
So when you click on the arrow that has changed into the hand, Shiva's drum plays and something new opens up. It was a marvelous interpretation of what they saw on the screen. And I thought, well, why not?
I love that. I love that you ended that with that why not, because there's actually several people online, Sugata, who are saying, why not? Why is this not the norm? I want to read a tweet here from Miss Sci-Fi Writer, she calls herself. She says, self-directed learning in the digital age should be the standard. The radical choice is sending your kids to school. And so, Amy, I want to go to you with that, because I'd venture to say this is a type of view that you would agree with.
It actually is. I believe the schools are obsolete as we see them now. I think they're anti-learning and anti-creativity. It's all about teaching to the test. Instructional time is really just following an authoritarian guideline of set, antiquated facts that are generally meaningless to a lot of children. Children are interested and passionate about whatever it is that they are passionate about. They'll look to the internet and in real time discover what they're interested in and delve as deep and as far as they want to go. You force them to learn things that they're not interested in, or they're not ready for, or they're beyond, and you're going to bore them. And then the only thing school does is foster this anxiety around grades and testing, these external measures that are irrelevant.
So
they're anti-learning.
Can I just add something?
Yeah,
Could I
go
just
ahead.
add something?
Yes, Anita, go ahead.
I think what Amy is saying is absolutely true. And I think when we talk about self-directed learning, we're talking about empowering children, taking ownership for their learning. And, you know, however young you are, taking ownership, getting buy-in at a very young age into their own practice, their own learning, can only be positive for the child and the teacher and the institution of education.
Okay.
See, Mike,
Right.
you're a teacher. Is this giving you a weird feeling at the back of your neck, like, oh no, there goes my job right now, they're talking me out of a job? Or does it resonate with you at all?
No, it resonates with me personally. I experiment in my own classroom. Sometimes I teach very directly. Sometimes I'm more of a coach. Sometimes I'm more of a teammate. Other times I've given them a driving question and said, there's the computers, you guys do it. And I've experimented and taken notes on what they like and what they do well at. I disagree that giving them the open chance to just learn on their own works. That's not what I've seen. A lot of times, in fact, they get stressed out by too many choices and too much freedom. Some people feel claustrophobic by a teacher that's too directive, but others feel stressed out by open spaces. And they explicitly tell me, we could use your guidance on this. You've gone to school for this. You don't have to do everything. But I don't think a child wants to be thrown into the wilderness with no guide or a guide who's not going to tell them a little bit about where to go or what to avoid.
Sugata, does your research back up what Mike says, or does it contradict what Mike is saying?
No, I think Mike is quite right. You need the guide. I would put it this way, and I would be interested in seeing if Mike agrees, that the guide doesn't have to be in the front. The guide has to be at the back, you know? You kind of,
absolutely.
Go from the back. But I also want to point out one more thing, which is, if you have a guide, then there is the question of discussing a guide. But there are places on the planet where you cannot have a guide. And there, it's not a question of if the children want to or do not want to have be guided. They have to be plunged into the internet with nobody.
Yes, and I'm really inspired by your videos and what you're doing. I think we're coming from two different environments in some ways, but you've also talked about how to make this a global thing, that it doesn't just happen to happen in one country, that this is more of it has global ramifications, I think, if I understand you correctly. And I appreciate what you're doing and see what you're doing and believe it to a certain extent, but I've also seen in my own laboratory, if you will, that the results don't always come out the same.
Of course not.
The beauty
of
the beauty of self-directed learning is that, the beauty of self-directed learning is that a child is actually learning to become a self-starter. They're becoming entrepreneurial. They're taking ownership over their learning. It's not that teachers are obsolete, or in my case, I'm the parent raising children in this environment where we're learning a lot from home and out in the world. It's not that I'm irrelevant. I don't unparent. I guide and facilitate. I create a rich environment with access to multiple devices, technology, books, and other resources, and the children are free to satiate their own desires. I'm there as a guide and a facilitator, but I don't insert my agenda or my knowledge, because the knowledge that's coming out daily is constantly evolving. The future for these children is not based on the education that we devised long ago that we keep trying to repurpose. It needs to be revamped so that children are learning what's relevant. And part of what's relevant for the future is being self-sufficient in technology and self-starters and capable of learning on the fly what's demanded of them, whatever that may be, whether they're entrepreneurial or end up being part of a more traditional workforce. One has to learn how to learn, not just what to learn, but how to go about it, how to find things, how to critically think about it, how to problem solve. And if someone's constantly telling them what to do, what to think, what to know, they're not taking any ownership over that.
You know, and Amy, I hear what you're saying, and people online also hear what you're saying. There's someone that agrees with you. This is Stephen. He says, I have used this type of learning, this self-organized learning environment, and I've loved it. But he says kids who are used to being given orders don't do as well, and there needs to be a cultural change. So picking up on that, Sunita, I actually want to play this video comment from someone named Michael, and I'd like to hear what you think.
For many children, peer groups mean social exclusion and isolation. This is why teachers are needed. It's one of their responsibilities to prevent ostracism and provide universal access to knowledge. Moreover, group work often means that one or two people do most of the work while others are freeloading. As a result, it's not always the most effective approach.
So Sunita, just to sum up what he said, what happens in your own experience to those kids who may not be at the front by the computer, who may be in the back, who may be shy, who may not be as active learners as other students?
Well, I'll give you an answer from two perspectives. I was a teacher for 15 years, and now I'm a Skype granny. There are always going to be people who do more work than others, and you see this in business as well. And they're always going to be exclusion. I think, going back to Sujata's point and going back to what Amy said, it's about facilitation. The guide, the support person is there, the teacher is there, but they're not in front, they're at the back. When I was teacher training, one of the most important things that really resounded with me is the teacher talking time and student talking time. We have to give the children responsibility that they are able to resolve conflicts, resolve group dynamics themselves. By constantly interfering or constantly giving our opinion, we're not allowing children to develop. This is part of life, resolving conflicts and getting into groups. And this is really important, to be there as a figure in the background, but not to take control. So I don't really agree with the video comments.
Sunita, let me just play a little clip. This is a Skype granny in action and give you an idea of how it actually works. So let me just play this little clip for you. I'm not even going to tell you what the lesson is. You'll work it out in just a moment.
Look what I made. Can you see what this is? Does it taste of strawberry or orange? Yay! It's really good when you get stuff from them. If they start asking you questions or telling you what they'd like to do, then you're having a dialogue. Look up when I've gone and see what a jellyfish is.
So the idea of this, Sugata, it's not just sitting in front of the internet, having a great person like Sunita or any other Skype granny. You can also have a Skype granddad as well. They don't have to be literal grandmothers or grandfathers, but somebody who's there. Exactly. Somebody who's there just to encourage people. Can you explain the concept of the granny method? What does a granny do for you in your educational setup here?
Well, the granny basically just has a conversation. And when you have a conversation with children, particularly little children, they learn a lot of things other than the content of the conversation. They look at how you speak. They look at how you say it. They look at your facial expressions, the turn of phrase, and they pick all that up. Right. There is a lot you can learn from just a conversation. And the other point I wanted to make based on the previous discussion is not to mix up this method with what is called group work. And to say group work works sometimes or group work doesn't work sometimes.
Right.
A self-organized learning environment.
What's the difference, Sugata, between what you're suggesting, which is a school in the cloud, and group work? What's the difference between those two ideas?
A school in the cloud is an environment where the internet is available to children, but in a restricted manner, so that every child doesn't have his own little device and his or her own little corner to sit with that device. If you have 4 computers and 20 children, what else can they do except make groups? But then they may not make groups of 4 or 5, they might make one group of 15 and they might make another group of 3. We don't control that. So that's where it differs from group work. And they also can change groups and talk to each other, mix around and so on. Once in a while, they might go and ask a granny something, and sometimes the granny may not even be there, but the granny may have left a question behind. So they really are on their own, which is very different from the way in which group work is done. And yes, some children will take the lead and the others will follow. But unlike in real school, where the child who excels is encouraged and the child who does not is discouraged, in the soul, different children will excel at different things. So one day you find a child leading and the next day you find another child leading. It's very, very different from group work.
Can I just pick up on a point that you just said, Sugata? It's because I'm a Skype granny, and that was very challenging for me in the beginning of letting the children self-learn and self-direct their learning, because for my teaching background, it is incredible how they form around the projects, how they work together. You have to give them confidence and stand back. It is challenging. It is so different to the way that we think, the way that we have always thought about education. But I can tell you from my own experience, it's incredible what they learn, what they engage, how they engage.
All right, so let's give some people are watching this, Anita, and they're thinking, well, what is incredible that they learn? Give us an example.
Well, for example, some of the children have very limited access to English. I only speak in English. They are able to repeat stories, answer concept questions, which are quite complicated. They all help each other. They're able to, for example, I give them a question, how does hair grow? And they go together and they look up how hair grows. Which is a complicated question even for 7-year-olds and 9-year-olds in English, in an English-speaking country. So in that respect, it is the way they learn, the method in which they learn, and how they learn in their environment, with the presence of a granny and having the access to somebody when and if needed.
Right. Malika?
So Mike, when you hear an idea like Sugata's, this one we're talking about, I wonder what goes through your mind. We have other people online wondering that same thing. This is Chella on Facebook who writes, what happens to the teacher's livelihood of teaching? So Mike, do you see this as a threat to your profession?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I wrote about in The Atlantic. I don't know whether this would work, his souls would work. In a way I believe in them, in a way I don't. But if it does, you're going to lose the middle class of teaching. If teachers become facilitators, if they are the guide from the back of the group, is what we just said, I think the kids will generally find somebody to lead them if the teachers are in the back. They're still going to go to the internet and find somebody else to teach them. And as a facilitator, they'll bust our unions with that. If they know that they can pay us as a facilitator, I see this as kind of an outsourcing or a group sourcing of a job, and it deprofessionalizes us. I think one major misconception is that we're not doing this in the public schools. in the last 10 years, I've seen so much of us being told to be facilitators, not the sage on the stage. And it's been a little bit less efficient because of it, but it has fostered that growth that you guys are talking about. But this is not new to us. We are doing this in the public schools. And as a result, we're becoming more and more into facilitators. We're going to be replaced by facilitators that are better at it. They're really, really good at it, but they're going to find their content online. I see people going online to lead them, and I don't know that we want the internet leading us as the teacher, as the content expert, or a bunch of individual unschoolers.
Sugata, you presented your idea at a TEDx conference. In fact, you've done several TEDx speeches that went down so well. In fact, so well in 2013 that you were given $1 million to actually help with your research. Now, if your research, at the end of your research, when you finished it, you put it all together, and you could say, this is how I would like the school of the future to be like. Can you describe that school to us? Is it a school?
I wish I could.
I'm not even sure it is a school. What is it?
Yes,
where do children go to learn? How is that set up?
I wish I could, but let me put it another way, and I think it might answer several of the issues that have come up, including Mike's. When the horse and carriage gave way to the automobile, the coachman went away because the passengers became the drivers. There's nothing much you can do about it. It had its own problems. People crashed cars, people drove over each other. We had to invent a whole lot of things. We had to invent traffic policemen.
But is transportation, Sugata, the same as education? Is a form of transportation the same as the way that we teach our generations?
Life itself goes from one point to another. Life itself is a process of transportation. Thought is a process of transportation. You go from one place to another.
The music industry held on to it.
You either have the choice of having somebody drive you,
right,
or you can learn how to drive yourself. My experiment is to see, if I let them drive, where will they go?
And I feel also it's just as inevitable.
Let me just get in Amy first, and then Mike. Very quickly, everybody, because we've got a couple of minutes before we're rounding up this part of the show. Then I'll take you all online. So, Amy, briefly.
Just because schools may be obsolete doesn't necessarily mean there's no role for a teacher. It just changes. If you can imagine a school where it's a collaborative learning environment, where children are able to follow their own interests with multiple teachers possibly in a room guiding with one-on-one instruction, small group instruction, when it's desired. The child is in the driver's seat of their own education, determining what they're interested in and how they learn best, and then they have teachers and guides and mentors to consult with. It's not that an adult is obsolete in a child's education. They just shouldn't be forcing it.
All right,
what
let
I'm
me just check in, Amy, take a breath, Amy, for a moment, because I just want to hear what our teacher has to say about that. Mike, are you horrified by what Amy just suggested?
No, I feel like actually there's part of me that thinks it's inevitable, but just like the bookstores or the librarians are taken over by Amazon. But you asked the question, is that what we want to do with education, or can we stop it, or is it okay? It's great that kids have the choice of the internet and Amazon or whatever, but you could have groups of facilitators and teachers. They won't be as professional as they used to. What I learned when I got my master's, what I learned when I went to college is not used as much now as it was 10 years ago. And I think 10 years from now it'll be used even less.
All right.
And
Mike, take a breath, because I'm going to take you online. Very appropriate for this conversation. Malika, last word from you.
Well, we asked our community what a classroom would look like 10 or 20 years. Michael writes in, I would recommend no one-size-fits-all classroom, but a multiplicity of cultural, social, and tech experiments and innovations.
Right. So thank you very much to our guests. What an incredibly interesting conversation. We are not over yet. So Sugata Mitra, Amy Harrington, Mike Godsey, and Sunita Semi. We will find them online. That's on the post show at stream.aljazeera.com. See you there. Hope you can make it. Take care. Hello Hello again, this is the Streams Online Post Show. We're continuing our conversation on the future of learning. Sugata, we have had on our editorial meetings back here in the stream so many long conversations about education and how we were all taught and our favourite teachers and can the internet care for us and terrible teachers that we've had and bad schools we've been to. So you've really kind of shaken up the way we even think about education. Is that enough for you? Or do you want us to change the way we learn to?
You know what? I don't particularly want to change anything. If things change because of what I'm doing or saying, that's all right. But what I want to do is to find out how learning happens. And the one thing that I can tell you is that people learn by themselves. So the answer to the question, can children learn on their own, can only be yes, because there is no other way to learn.
I agree completely. There is no other way to learn other than intrinsically motivated, self-guided learning. The internet is what helps everyone right now. The fact that Sugata is bringing that into globally is phenomenal. In the Western world, you know, kids are digital natives. They're learning everything. Toddlers know how to use iPhones and computers effortlessly. They know more than the adults. They're learning independently all the time. To take technology out of the equation is futile. To think that adults have all the knowledge, that it's not available to everyone in real time, is just superannuated. It's available to us all the time. I'm trained in so much formal education, and I use none of it. Everything that I've learned as an adult post-law school, I've learned on my own.
Amy, there was one thing I was a little confused by as I was studying Sugata's methods and the research, is at what point do you learn to read and write basic comprehension? Who teaches you that? How do you learn that?
Well, children learn that the same way they learn how to walk and talk, by being around people who are walking and talking. That's how they learn. It's
we have
kind
a big
of
chunk
like
of the world
children
who don't read, who don't write, who don't have access to that. So how do you get that amount of knowledge? Who helped you learn that?
Well, one has to be in a literate environment. So,
right.
you know, if you're around books, there's studies that show that homes that have books have more literate children, whether
Yes.
they're being read to or not, just being submersed with books, being around technology, being around writing. If you're around the written word and you have an interest, a child can learn it. A child doesn't actually have to be taught how to read and write. In America, we think that if you're a certain age, you must know these things. And that's not necessarily true. There are many children who learn before going to school, and there are many children who learn on a slightly later time frame. We like to label them with disorders if they don't learn in a certain time frame. But children do learn when they're organically interested and surrounded by it. Now, if you have a child kept in a dark closet with no access to books and technology, yes, you're going to have a problem. But if they're alive and out in the world, signs everywhere in the world, marquees, posters, words are everywhere, numbers are everywhere. It's a part of life. You don't actually have to teach formal math because numbers are a part of everyday living. So if you're alive and active in the world, you're going to be exposed to reading, writing, and mathematics.
So Amy and Sugata, people online are hearing what you're saying, but there is a question about how this applies to real world applications. So Nafisi says, if schools become obsolete, how can we assess the value or the quality of learning that students obtain elsewhere? And another person, Bello, says online education is okay, but the question is how many companies accept that, especially in Africa? So Sugata, how do we measure aptitude? And then how do we make sure that that learning that we've self-learned is then accepted by the companies and real world experiences once we're done with the school age?
Well, I think that what we assess needs to be examined a little bit further. I mean, what if you had two people apply for a job? One of them got a very high score in school, can recite all the multiplication tables, you know, without thinking about it, can read very clearly. But when asked what the Android KitKat operating system is silent. The other guy says, I can find out in 2 minutes from Google, but he doesn't know how his multiplication tables. Who will you hire?
Computer.
I think that's
Yeah, go ahead, Sunita. Who would you hire?
Sorry. I think it's a very, very good point that Sugata just said. What we're assessing and how it translates into recruitment process or into businesses, that is the next question. That's really the big question. If you look at businesses now, people want staff to think on their feet. They want more staff to be entrepreneurial. They want staff to think outside the box. These are all skills that you learn if you're self-directed learning. But of course, this is going to take time. Things take time to change. People take time to change, and this is a cultural change with vis-a-vis education and how we view it.
Also, I think, Sugata, what you're getting at is that it's your aptitude isn't necessarily mirrored by what other qualifications you may have on paper, but you're trying to get through human resources without that bit of paper, and you might find it quite tricky. Getting into the interview room, that's a whole different thing, but getting through the hiring process, this is the real world, sort of, let's bring it back down to earth. These are the realities of a more radical approach to learning that actually is really how we act in the real world, but maybe not how we hire right now.
Well, I mean, if you just give me a second, because I think this is a very important point.
Yeah, it's critical. Otherwise, what's the point? Yeah,
it's also a bit hard to understand or accept. And let me give an example. I mean, let's say you give a math problem to a person during an interview or somewhere.
Yeah.
And he goes to Yahoo Answers and he looks that up and he chats with a couple of friends and he comes back with an answer. And another guy sits with a piece of pencil and paper and solves the problem by himself. I know that my education says that the guy who solved it himself is educated. The guy who didn't, he's a cheat. But is that the world we are in? Do we really care anymore as long as he gets the answer, as long as he knows how to get it quickly?
I suppose it depends. If the job is writing computer programs, you can't really be G-chatting your mates all day long trying to get your computer program together. You do have to be able to do your own mathematics.
That's a fantastic example.
I am not qualified to take on Dr. Sugata Mitra, but Mike is.
I absolutely
you just mentioned the one area where you need no education.
I used to be a really good computer programmer.
You used to
be. A really good creative one.
Yes.
The way I used to write programs, I had to really think.
Right.
And then I used to write.
Yes.
And that is completely obsolete now.
No, do not say that. No, because you would not be here on this program. You wouldn't have got $1 million from TED. Nobody around the world would be following you if you couldn't think and write and do all the amazing things you were taught to do or you were able to do.
It's so interesting to bring up programming because
you're dismissing your own ability
things to learn online.
But to write a computer program today, the ability you need is the ability to look for a patch, download it, and give it.
No, that's how I would write it. But real people who make proper money think it through. They create it. They create new ways of doing things. They don't just copy and paste.
In order to be able to create new ways of doing things, you have to be able to think independently and be able to learn and problem solve. You don't learn and problem solve when an adult is constantly telling you what to think and then measuring it on a regurgitated test.
See, that's not what I'm arguing, and that's the universal education argument, and I totally prescribe to that one. But I think, well, you heard what Sugata said. Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a fallacy. It's a cliche to say, if you can Google it, we don't need to teach it. That's true to a certain extent. I don't teach the MLA format. I don't hammer their heads with it or anything until they memorize it, because you can go online and find out how to do it.
Sure.
On the other hand, I know students that have had a more classical education that say they prefer to have things memorized. It's more useful. It's really easy to say, if I can do it on Google, I don't need it in my head. But people don't go to Google in the middle of a conversation. We're not all looking at our computers right now. This is all in our heads.
We're looking at our phones. We're looking at our iPhones.
Yeah.
But doesn't that annoy you? You're having a debate with someone and they get their phone out. So rather than thinking through the debate, they're like, let me just check. And then that's the end of the debate. And you were having a fantastic debate.
Factual information
that was absolutely hilarious, because he just said, we are not looking at our computers, but that's exactly what all of us are doing right now. We're staring intently at our computers.
Yes, we are.
Well, Sugata, of course, since you said that, it only begs our community to come in now, of course. So Melissa says, if intrinsic motivation is necessary to learning, what do you do with students who are not intrinsically motivated? And so I want to pass that over to you, Sunita, since you are a Skype granny. What happens to those students who aren't as eager?
I have to say there are very, very few students who are not eager and are not intrinsically motivated. They're very positive and very happy that somebody from across the world is coming to talk to them. This is where, again, the other students, the other participants in the school in the cloud, they come in and they motivate their colleagues or their participants. I think this is where the whole aspect of learning, self-directed learning, is monitored, managed, and executed by the group. I understand what Mike is saying. I think he's brought up a valid point that there are different aspects and different objectives as a teacher in a classroom. But I think one mustn't forget that for some of the Skype granny work that I do, these are in schools which have absolutely no access for the children to have English. And they do incredibly well within an hour, and it is generated by them.
All right, Mike, what did you want to add? I know you were trying to jump into the conversation. Go ahead.
Oh, it's just one more example. My students straight up tell me they don't need to learn the rules of punctuation because they can always look them up later. And that's just not true. When you go to write something, you don't look at Google over and over again with every comma you put in or every apostrophe you put in. That's something that has to be what they're going to say drilled into you. It takes some discipline. You learn the rules, and then you learn how to write in a formal way, and then you can be creative with it. And there's a blend in that in the public schools. And I don't feel like that's intrusive to teach them the rules of grammar. And they really are starting to say that if we can Google it, if we can see it on the internet, then we don't need to learn it. We'll just look it up later.
If you read a lot, you'll also see grammar in action. If you read online, if you read books, the old-fashioned print media, you actually see proper grammar mechanics and writing style and punctuation. That's actually not something that needs to be drilled and killed into children. I mean, I have a child as young as 6 who can understand and appreciate this without any formal instruction. He's alive and engaged in the world.
I think the point
that they intrinsically read.
I think the point that Mike is making is actually a very strong point. And I hear it this way. Yes, you can allow the passengers to drive the car, but you can't do away with the traffic lights and the policemen.
Depends what part of the world you're in. Okay, so let me show you something very quickly, because I tweeted out earlier today, do we need teachers now we have the internet? Join a provocative AJ stream conversation, which is this one. Here's the response from Nima. Nima says, teachers just do not teach, they also care. Computers cannot care. I had a couple of amazing teachers who I remember now, 30 years later. They were amazing. They shaped me. They helped me. They taught me punctuation and some other things as well. Sugata, how do you get that? How do you get that caring element in the mix?
Computers do care for you. And they will care for you more in the future.
Well, I do love my Mac, but I don't think it loves me back.
We have a generation that's being shaped by the internet.
Right.
Not by one teacher, but by 4 billion people.
Ah.
I don't think you can have it better than that.
Ah, okay. All right. So that is a lovely point to end on. For now, we can take this conversation online. Thanks to our guests, Sugata, Amy, Mike, and Sunita. Last word to, I was going to say, the internet. Be appropriate for this conversation.
That
Malika?
is appropriate, especially because it's this comment from Robert. He says, what happens if everyone is simply going to the internet for answers? We run out of people coming up with the answers. But he follows up saying, we need to balance the art of Googling and still culture the ability to critically think about problems.
Thank you, guests, for giving us a really intriguing basis for a conversation, and Sugata and Mitra as well for being the peg for that conversation. I will see you all online. Take care.